Welcome back to another episode of our podcast, where we bring you the stories and experiences of accomplished legal professionals from around the world. Today, we are honored to have with us Shreya Nair, a dynamic and multifaceted lawyer with a passion for mentorship, research, and advocacy. Shreya's journey spans diverse experiences, including her LLM in international arbitration and dispute resolution from the National University of Singapore and her LLB from DSNLU. Her accomplishments range from coaching successful mood teams to publishing articles on topics like judicial intervention and space tourism. In this episode, we'll delve into Shreya's experiences navigating a global legal career, her journey through the LLM application process, and her reflections on balancing diverse legal interests. Let's welcome Shreya Nair to the show. Hello and welcome to Brief Encounters. It's an honor having you here. The first question is something that we ask most of our guests. What sparked your interest in law and what factors influenced your decision to pursue it as a career?
As non-committal as this is gonna sound, but law was not something that came to my mind in the first instance. I have always been like really into debating and like public speaking and all of that. So my parents sort of were like, okay, maybe journalism could be something. I knew like engineering was not my thing. Although I was a good student in school, so they were like, might as well do it and all of that because I come from a very small city like Riva. So in MP, so the decision is not taken by you; it's taken by what everyone else is doing, right? So somehow I like refrain and restrain myself from getting on the quota train and all of that, and I just did my education, and then I was like, no, I know this is not working out for me. Just let me be, let me decide. And after interacting with a few of people of my batchmates, what they were doing and all of that, I was like, okay, law seems like a great option. It still, includes all of my interests while it's academically intense, and I do enjoy academics. I really enjoyed being a student throughout my life. So I was like, okay, might as well take that up. I gave my CLAT, I got into DSNLU, and then there was like through the other NLUs, and I was like, might as well give it a shot. Like they had recently gotten a campus. My father was really impressed, and then he was like, okay, this is a mid-tier, so you might as well, you'll be the big fish in the small pond. So you might as well enjoy that attention. I was like, oh, cool. I will take it. I think one of the reasons I really like law as a career right now, while I'm actually doing litigation and I do go to courts, is the way I get to see the impact I'm making in the like very first instance. I think doctors, medical as a profession is something where you see an instant effect. And then law, the social impact, like every judgment, every word that's written, it's so critical. I think that is something that really, now motivates me to, be better at it, be more articulate about it, give more attention to detail. Those skills, I just really respect that a lot. That is why, law is something that, attracted me.
That's really nice. So I would say it was like an organic growth when it comes to law for you.
Probably. Yeah. It wasn't like love at first sight. It was just like
I think that's the
eventually.
best. I think it's like falling in love slowly. It's like it's the best.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
So at DSNLU, you were actively involved in various committees, including the Internal Complaints Committee, Recruitment Coordination Committee, and the Center for ADR. Could you share the type of work these roles entailed? And in your opinion, do law students benefit in engaging in such extracurricular activities?
A lot. I don't think I can, underplay the role these committees, being a part of these committees has had on me, especially in the later years of law school when I would lead these committees to do works, to take up projects. And, my law school sort of fell in between the COVID times. So, connecting with juniors and connecting with our seniors, people who have already graduated, became a very crucial thing because this was the only way to tap into what is going on in the industry and keep your juniors updated, right? So you sort of become the link between, what's going on, what is the future like for law students graduating in that span. So an ICC sort of happened like due to an unfortunate incident. We had to create an internal complaints committee, and there were elections going on, and I was someone that students reach, like juniors reach out to. I don't see like a lot of female candidates participating, so ma'am, why don't you take this up? And then I did, and going through that entire process, now that I know, what posh entails, like I'm someone who was there, I know what it means, I know what the constitution is like, and I sort of, help that develop in other, like now, right now, I do corporate policy making with the firm I'm working. So, it really helps you understand where everything is coming from when you see stuff happening at the ground level. And being involved with the committee really gets you involved with your student society, what your college is like, what is the student cohort like. And you really need to know that to understand, what kind of an image your college is going to, put out in the future. So I think that really matters. Student interaction matters. And recruitment coordination was also something very important because I needed to understand the kind of companies that were coming in, what are they looking for on a first-hand basis. And arbitration was something that I was in love with since my second year. So because of COVID, the committee sort of had died down. We had VC changes and all of that. So me and my batchmate, we restarted the ADR cell and sort of rejuvenated it, did a conference, did internal events, and it was something I believe every university should have an ADR committee. It's intrinsic at this point. So yeah, I mean, it's really, I cannot undervalue the importance and the role these committees have played in my life, in my law student life, and even now. So yeah.
That's really cool. So you had mentioned that you had an interest in, ADRs from your second year. How did you develop this interest? Was there any particular event or any subject that you studied that sparked this interest in you?
So this was like just towards the end of my second year. There was a flagship event of my university which was taking place in Paris. So I applied for it and I got through it, and there were like one of other my seniors who was there, and we were flown to Paris. And when I went there, I got to like attend these conferences, and I went to see the ICC, International Court of Arbitration, and I also went to like every big law firm that you can think of, hosting events, talking to them. And that is when I got a grasp of, okay, commercial arbitration, institutional arbitration, ad hoc arbitration, all of that. I was something like, okay, like how is a procedure so widely like regarded? Why is this suddenly this wave of, arbitration coming in? I got into it. And then I started reading about it, and I was like, this is something I can really do, because I was sort of like afraid is would not want me. I was just sort of apprehensive about like court litigation in the early years of my law school. So I was like, okay, no, arbitration is something which does not involve going to the court, and yet it's so like critical to commercial law. I might as well read up about it. And then my interest developed, and I started taking everything I could see. If there was arbitration written on it, I would apply for it. It was that like crazy for me. So that is how, I got into it and become a really important part of my, law school profile.
Right, right. So I think you're one of the very few people who discovered their niche at like such a young age at like law school. What advice do you have for students? I mean, this is coming from a personal, agenda as well. How do people discover their niche, or what is something that they're interested in? Any tips for that?
I think this comes with the caveat that you don't have to. To be very honest, like the advice I get from my bosses is mostly that, it's great that you have a niche, but, we would appreciate if you could just do everything right now. And that is what I get to do right now. I do everything that is thrown at me, because that could also, make you like build a resistance toward reading other laws. You will start reading every law the same way, and that's not how law is supposed to be read or interpreted. So I don't think that really works. But yeah, if you do feel you have a calling for some particular law, say competition law, the way that law operates, I do suggest that, you read up more about it, talk about people who have already established themselves, like talk to people about who have already established themselves in the field. I think I had that exposure very early on, where I had people who were already very much into arbitration, or like were arbitrators or heading institutions. When I was in my third year, I was getting mentored by the registrar of SIAC. So, in because I got that kind of exposition, of course I had like it was easier for me to develop that niche. But yeah, that again, as I said, it comes with the caveat that you cannot sideline everything else, because arbitration at the end of the day is just one of the laws which sort of exists in this ecosystem. So if you really want to develop a niche in one kind of a law, read up, max out your reading about it, because law is so intense that you will realize that it's just not one law standing alone in any circumstance, right?
Makes sense.
So like I do think that in that sense, just like reading about it and then like talking to people about it and like doing moots really helps. In law school, I think that really helps, that okay, do I have a grasp of what I'm trying to get into? So I think those could be the starting steps, and then you'll realize eventually that okay, this is it for me, and I will just like work through this my entire life, and it will be fruitful. I don't think that it's not like going to work out well if you don't know everything, because you can't possibly know everything.
Obviously,
So
there's too
yeah.
much. There's too much.
Yeah, not in law, no.
All right. So, next question. So, you were an active participant in moots and debates, like you've mentioned during college, like achieving significant milestones, runner-up in the HV Parade, QC Memorial Moot, and receiving an honorable mention at the Viz East Moot. How did these experiences, like you mentioned in the previous question, how did they enhance your overall law school journey, and how important do you believe mooting is?
I think it's very important. I mean, you really need to moot to break that barrier, to understand if you're good at researching, if you're good at public speaking, or if you're great at both. This is such a great opportunity because it does not have a level one filtering. If you want to participate, you will participate, right? So I do think it's very important to give students that chance, because there are certain moots which have like a filtering at national level, and that sort of can be luck based, and you're just refrained from going to the global rounds, right? So that is the respect I also have for WIS, is that it's so global in nature that it lets everyone participate. And that is why it's very important to understand that the resources that we have as Indian law universities are pretty much at pedestal with a lot of global universities. So even that, to tap into that resource bucket, to understand how to use these resources, to understand how to use LinkedIn to get to these resources, I think it's very important that you participate in modes. I did, like when we did HVQC Pereira, COVID happened and we could not go there, and we were only like written submissions got the award. But we understood that, okay, then we saw the other colleges that had participated and all of that, and we understood, okay, it's a really big morale booster. Like regardless of what you score or what you end up being, going there, interacting with students, seeing other people participate, seeing yourself participate, it's very crucial. And you to interact with people who are judging these modes when they give you look individual, because this is very individual based as well. Like judges will take out their time to tell you what they really liked about your performance. And what I really like about WIS and other, like I think WIS does it a lot, is that these friendly moods like keep happening. Pre-moods, aside from that, like universities are so open to having moods in their regular time as well, like practice sessions with you one-on-one. Things that also really builds a community. Like I am in touch with people from Jordan, from Japan, from China. And it's just like, so it's such an exhilarating experience that I cannot undermine it. That's why I said, I love WIS. Anything with related to WIS, you will see me there. So it's just one of those things where it's so global in nature that you feel like such a big part of the community. And WIS community is pretty intense. Like it's so well connected, so bonded, that it really helps you out at times. So I do think that people, if you're into arbitration, WIS is something that you should do. Otherwise, also, I think Oxford Prize Media, Stetson, the Manfred Law, all of these are really great moods to participate, because you get that kind of exposure, you get to meet people people with similar interests. And because they're such like focused on one subject moods, that it will also let you know that whether this is cut out for you or not, or whether you are cut out for it or not. So I think that really also matters.
I think Wiz has a pre-moot in Singapore as well, right? Or was it?
Yes, they do have a pre-moot. I think the Indian pre-moot is the general mood, and then they
Yeah.
have one in Singapore, and then it's a one in Dubai. Like a
Malaysia,
lot of
so
Middle Eastern moods are also there. There's the AIAC one is in Malaysia,
right.
so we did that also. I think that was really fun. So it's pretty good. Like it's a great experience. Yeah.
You're right. And I think it's really great that in law schools, I mean, I'm doing Nuremberg this time.
Okay.
I'm participating in that. So I think I'm quite excited. I mean, I was getting the opportunity of doing, Manfred and Stetson and all of those, but then I thought Nuremberg seemed like a better, because I wanted to explore international criminal law. Now, I don't know how
Okay.
great of a choice it was, but I think it's really cool that, at law school, you're getting an opportunity to go for such massive events and connect with people.
I agree.
It's
I agree.
it's
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. And, even getting the opportunity to reach to a platform of that sort, I think it's a win in itself, in a way.
I completely agree. Like as I said, like it does not really matter where you place. Of course, it in the first initial times when you see the result and you're like, oh, why did I not? Why did I not? Or if you do, absolutely great, right? But it's just the fact that even if a team which came in 85th in the West, say they will have met so many people by that time. They would have been coached by so many people at that time, that individually it would have had such a big impact that the results won't really matter.
Yeah.
So I think it's that this grasp is very important. Like a lot of people, even in my university, after my team did moot, nobody else did for a year. And I was just like, why is that happening? And then I spoke to my juniors, they're like, okay, they are not sure if they will reach whatever you guys achieved. I'm like, that really does not matter. We did not think we would get an honorable mention. This was the first time our university had participated in WIS. So
Wow.
I mean, like you cannot like hinge on the result so much that you just devoid yourself from experiences, right? So that is my advice. Like participate.
Yeah.
That's the end of it. Like participate.
And for WIS
That's
specifically,
where
I've heard that people do it for the community because, like you mentioned, it's a very enriching community in itself.
Oh, yes, yes. Once you're on that email subscription of the WIS community, you'll know what's going on the ancestral working groups. You'll know what opportunities are there. You'll know who to reach out to for mentorship or to reach out for mood coaching. It's that helpful a community. Like students are ready to spend their time. Even colleges like KCL, Harvard are ready to spend their time. You think of them as these big universities, the students having so much opportunity, they will not bow down and do a round with you. They're all open to do it. NUS, Harvard Law, NYU, anyone who's participating that year is ready to do it with you. So
Wow.
it's that important to understand, and you have contacts, you have LinkedIn connections with people who will go on to become huge people like in the industry. So I cannot just downplay the role of this moot, the role this moot has had on me, and it made me fall in love with arbitration more. So I think that also really matters. Like if you're someone who's really into environmental law and you have not done Stetson because you're afraid of the results, why? I know there is, memo selection round. Sure, it's dreadful, but might as well participate. The research that you do, the amount of time that you're going to spend, it will make you realize how much you wanted to do environmental law, right?
Yeah.
I think that really matters.
That's very true. So you played a huge role, obviously, for your college trajectory when it comes to several competitions, but also for your juniors. So you were serving as a moot coach for a lot of your juniors. You're a member of the WizMoot Alumni Association's core team for 2022-23. Could you share what these roles entailed and what drew you to them?
So, like, as soon as you participate in the WISMoot, you become a part of the WISMoot Alumni Association. That's the bar for it, right? And so they have this MAA like a core team, which runs like different programs and, writes like the Windobona Journal, publications, and then a lot of like diversity and inclusion events at the WISMoots, and then the pre-moot organization, all of that, right? So I was a mentee with their mentorship program in 2022. And that is when that is when I got to be mentored by the registrar of SIAC, who's now with the LCIA, Mr. Kevin Nash. And he was my mentor, and he really helped me through my process of LLM application. Like he was the only one who I reached out to, like shamelessly. I would just text him. And he also helped me like judge moot court rounds of the juniors I was coaching. So then I understood the importance of, having a mentor in the industry and being part of such a mentorship program. So I was like, okay, I want to give back, and I applied to their core team and I became a part of their mentor-mentee team. So like doing that, so the role generally comprised of like going through applications and selecting who would be the right person to be a mentee, and also selecting mentors and then like pairing them up based on experience, geographical location, expectations, and like what do they want out of this role, and what does the mentor want out of their mentee, right? So this was the like crux of it. I also got to like host panel discussions for the mentees and the mentors on like different topics, on education abroad, on work life abroad, and on opportunities abroad, stuff like that. So like it was basically a way for me to, so while I was doing it was just this an additional extracurricular activity I would get to do. So because the LLM in the first half was really intense, like as you know, NUS is pretty like academically intense, and it's not just about writing a thesis at the end of the year and you're getting done with it. It's about like taking up courses, giving exams, having like, it's a Socratic method, so you have to be prepared every day. You must have read up your material. But it was sort of a break from that. I got to interact with again like people from all. I think the major reason I did a lot of these activities was to meet people everywhere who had the similar interests like mine, right? And to talk about what arbitration is like in their country, or what studying arbitration is like in their country, and where can I explore more opportunities for myself in the future. I think that is why sort of I participated in these committees or like these teams.
Right. All right. So obviously these moods played a very important role, throughout your law journey. But your internships have also been at quite prestigious firms such as J. Sagar Associates, Singh and Associates, and Mumbai Center for International Arbitration. And you've had great mentorship opportunities as well, like you've mentioned. So could you share insights into how these experiences shaped your understanding of law, and how did these experiences help you narrow down your area of specialization?
Oh, so I interned with MCIA during the end of my second year. And that sort of, it was during that experience, like I was directly interning, like directly under the Secretary General of the MCIA. And like, most of the times I would just talk to her and then I would realize that, okay, that is when sort of my, want to do an LLM strengthened. Like it was there when I realized that, okay, so being a part of an arbitral institution sort of entails knowing a lot of people, in the global community of arbitration. And like we conducted road shows in Dubai, and we were planning, like I was a part of the planning of the road show to be done in London. So I was contacting London firms and reaching out to them as an intern there. And like culling out what kind of Indian judgments were doing to the arbitration. We had recently had the 2021 amendment, and sorry, we had this 2019 amendment of the Arbitration Act. So the turmoil that had caused, assessing that. So, it doing all of that, as I said, made me realize, okay, I really like doing arbitration and I really like being part of this community, and I like the international exposition this, field of law offers me. So MCI sort of did that. The law firm internships, again, like at SNA, I do got to do a lot of commercial arbitration, domestic commercial arbitration. There was maritime arbitration. So I got to do that at a domestic level. And that sort of like, again, like, well, okay, it made me help to, narrow down what is the difference between what I did at MCIA versus what I was doing at an Indian law firm, and then you sort of understand the pros and cons of doing an LLM. So it sort of added on to it, like because I was sure at MCI that I wanted to do an LLM after this, a specialization definitely, and then sort of like get into these law firms. My JSA internship was a corporate law internship. I just wanted to, understand that I'm not shying away from a different thing just because I'm so much into arbitration. I think that is what, I wanted to say as well, that you should not refrain from opportunities just because you're into something else. Say you're really into like say you do an international criminal law moot and you get really into it, and then you just stop doing any other law firm internship and you just only, that's not something I advise at this young, at second year of law school. Do everything you can and then decide for yourself. So I think that's what I did with myself as well. I let myself venture into other stuff also. I like that also. GSA was a great internship. I had a great mentor there as well. My partner was really helpful because I was not into corporate that much till then. And then I realized, okay, this is also something I can do. If arbitration fails me, I can always fall back to corporate law. So I think that way also it really helps you create backups for yourself.
Right, right. So you mentioned that you have been in love with academics for the longest time. And I mean, your CGPA 9.2 out of 10, it reflects that. So you have earned several gold medals and subject distinctions. How did you manage to maintain such consistent academic excellence while balancing mooting, internships, other commitments? And what strategies worked best for you during law school?
I So I wasn't really sure how academically intense my college was going to be in the first year. So I mean, the first year subjects are also pretty light, right? It's just English and, legal methods, all of that. So there I was just doing what I did for my school. I would just read up like 2, 3 days before the exam, make notes and just rely on my notes and move on with life. And that's when I realized in first time that worked for me. And but in second semester, like started getting like legally intrinsic subject, like constitutional law became a part of it. So I think my advice would be, or like something that I think worked for me was to understand what balance meant in law school. Like you can't be just one of the kids who's just doing academics, and you then again can't be one of the kids who's just doing debating. Unless you of course want to be a professional debater and you want to make a career in it, sure. But I think balance as till the fourth year of your law school is very important because your CGPA does matter. It sort of creates an impression as to how serious you are about law school. And beyond that, I think, people always say priorities, but I don't think you at any, like, there was a time in school where, moods were my priority, and there was a time in school where academics were. So that's all right. But I do think, like, understanding how much time my mood is going to take, like, planning out your day really helps. I'm not that, disciplined in myself, but when I was doing, I did have my days planned out with along with my assignments and everything. So I think understanding what your goal for the day is, what you're supposed to deliver, and managing those expectations, that is the key to, cracking, whatever I did. I don't think I cracked anything, but yeah.
I mean, I understand being in law school, it's not easy to get like that high of a CGPA, and you did it while doing other things. It's actually really, really cool, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the LLM application, considering this project is about LLMs. So when did you decide to pursue a master's degree abroad, and what guided your decision in it? I remember you talked about MCIA playing a very important role when it comes to your LLM. So, but when was it that you solidified this decision to pursue a master's abroad?
So, like at MCI, I got to meet a lot of people who had already done their LLM abroad, like people from Pepperdine University, people from Chicago University of Law, and like the School of Law, UCLA. So I met a lot of people, a lot of seniors from there during like arbitration, and I would attend arbitral hearings where people were being like, some member of the team had also done some LLM from abroad. So I got to understand that okay, there's no scope for it. There's no arbitration focused LLM in India right now. So even if I thought the only law that sort of catered only LLM that catered, that was at the NUJS, like the law school in Kolkata. And then I was like, okay, then that would entail a process of cracking CLAT and then like filling NUJS as my top priority and then getting it. But then again, like the chart could fail me the way I fill out my sequence of choosing law schools. So I was sort of apprehensive about doing that again. Then I decided, okay, the other option is to pursue it abroad. And then I started, with my whole list. And then I had my top 10 schools. I had, what do I need for these schools? How is their LLM ranked in the global? There was like a full, like, I think I did a full 6-month research into, what do I need for these law schools? Where should I go? And then that sort of rolled down to like 7 law schools, like at the end of third year. These were my top 7 law schools that I will apply to. And then I started reading again, then the QS rankings changed, and then my sequences changed. And the year I applied to NUS, it was the 8th best law school in the world. And the program was high, like the maritime program and their arbitration program is one of the most highly regarded programs across the world. So I was like, okay, so anyways became my number one. And then my MITS, the School of Law, the Geneva Institute became my second. And then like I had KCL on my list and I had LSE on my list. Those were because of their profiles and the kind of general LM that they offered, because it had such a great course options to pick from. I was like, okay, if I end up going there, I'll take a general LM and I'll focus it on dispute resolution. And I also applied to QMUL. I also like did NYU. I applied to NYU. And then my like sort of at the end of the day I applied to 5 universities. And then that sort of, so I decided very early on, and I was very methodological in the sense of planning these things out, because I knew how tough it was for international students to crack these things, and especially with no experience, no law firm work experience, it sort of becomes really competitive. So since then, I knew that, okay, so I knew I had to, for NUS, I needed academics, but for like say a US based law schools, I needed a great statement of purpose. I needed to have a story. Why do I deserve to, attend? Why does NYU need me? All of that. So understanding those things really became, I sort of, I perused YouTube thoroughly. That okay, people who have gone to NYU with acceptances from NYU, acceptances from MITS, all of that, videos, writing the great statement of purpose. So very like since the beginning, I was very practical about it, that I need to spend a good amount of time into strategizing and then ending up where I wanted to be.
Wow, you've done a lot of research when it comes to
It was really fun. To be fair, I'm
Yeah, I
not
get
going
it.
to make
I
it
get
sound like
it.
like a chore, but it was really fun to watch videos of it, and like people having a great time at these. It's sort of a great motivation as
It
well. I'm
is,
not gonna lie. So I think it was
obviously.
really fun. Yeah.
And you started quite early. I mean, you said at the end of third year you had your list prepared. So
Yes.
I would say you
Yes, I
started your
had my
research
list.
around
My
second.
first draft of my list was
Yeah.
ready by Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So you've mentioned why you chose NUS over other institutions offering similar programs. So at the end of your application process, what were your acceptances? What were your rejections like? Why did you choose NUS over any other programs that you got accepted into? Were there any specific features of NUS that, stood out to you? And how did the entire narrowing down process work out?
So I got so the sequence of so I had also applied to Oxford just because I think there was nothing related to arbitration there, but of course it's Oxford and like if why not? It was just like I really wanted to apply to it. I did my research for it as well, but I wasn't accepted into Oxford. But I though so my first rejection came in from there, and I sort of expected that. I mean, I did not think that I had prepared as much for Oxford as much as needed. So there was that. Then I got my acceptance into QMUL pretty early on in the year, like around February, I knew. So I had my backup school ready already. But I was sort of waiting for NYU and, NUS. Those were the two schools I was hinging upon. Mids also I had applied to, but sadly I couldn't crack it. And then I got into NYU and I got into NUS as well. So those were like the three competing decisions. But again, like as much as I do think, and if you get into an American law school, that's amazing because you get a chance to be an America qualified lawyer. But again, like finances become a very huge consideration for Indian law school studying abroad. So yeah, I think like NYU would not have worked out for me that well in terms of managing my finances and also like balancing expectations, traveling back home if I need to, all of that. The logistics angle of it became really sort of problem, a sore throat, sore thing there. So I had to chuck it. And then a US application like results came pretty late. Okay, they came in May. And I was like, so I was like writing mails like, let's just let me know if I should sit and cry for a good hour because this is not working out. I only have QMUL on my plate right now. But like towards the end of like April, I got my results. Like in the first week of May, I was like, okay, NUS is there still for me. And so that was the first number one university. And I'm not just saying this because I got into it. I knew NUS was it for me. I did really want to go to NYU because, of course, New York. But that could not work out for certain reasons. And then QML again, London. I did think that okay, going to UK would open me to like vacation schemes and all of these opportunities. But at that point of time, I really wanted to do LLM to understand what arbitration is on a global level. It
Right.
wasn't really to go out and work abroad. Then the motivation was not there that much. In my third year, I wasn't really planning on doing that. I still do think that building a global career is still an option with my LLM. So I was like, okay. So those were the considerations. Where does Singapore put me in the map? Where does NUS put me on the map? What kind of courses are there? Who do I get to meet when I'm there? What is expected out of me as a student, and is it a big deal to crack anyways? I think that also really mattered because a lot of law schools are just generally more accepting of Indian students, but NUS has this like 0.8% for like recent graduates from India because they want to maintain a certain diversity in their cohort. So, okay, this is a big deal. I think I
Yes.
should
Huge
respect
deal.
that.
Very
And
huge deal.
it wasn't until I had gone there, we were like just
Mhm.
three, four students who were just recent graduates of 2022. So
Mhm.
then I was exposed to the fact that, okay, I've arrived kind of thing. So that is how I think dealing with rejection came in very easy because something I really wanted to do was already there for me.
Makes
But
sense.
yeah, those 2-3 months will, bother you a lot.
Yeah.
But you just, go with the flow. That's it,
Okay.
right?
So, considering that you had done your research so early, I would assume that your SOP was also prepared quite early into the race, or you have put in a lot of research when it comes to, working on the SOP. So, I think for NUS, the SOP has to be for 750 words. How did you approach writing your SOP for NUS, and what key themes did you highlight, and what was your process like crafting an SOP?
Oh, so like my SOP thing sort of started. Started writing my SOP. The first SOP draft I wrote was for my NYU application. So the that was so I what I knew from my research was US really wants you to tell them who are you more than what you offer. So I wrote a very like demographically intense and where I come from, all my struggles in life, although you know how it is, but I wrote all of that and that was my initial draft. And I made all of my family members vetted because my other people in my family were really also involved in the process. Like everyone has to read it. I need inputs from everyone. because this, if who am I would come more personally from a family member point of view. So I sort of, made them go through it. And that after that, like it was really later that I started working on my NUS SOP, but I had my research done. I couldn't really talk to someone who had gone to NUS already. I did not have that much time, or my research sort of lagged there because it's not that easy to reach out to people from NUS. Like, I did not have a senior who had gone there or anything like that. So that sort of was a gap. Although I had seniors who were in US and UK, so I could speak to them. So that way I was sorted. Here it took me a little while. And also the tricky part is, as you said, the 750 words. What do I write to convince you in 750 words, right? Even 2000 words seem less at that point. So I knew NUS wanted someone who had shown academic rigor. I think anyone who's planning to apply to NUS should know that the idea is to tell them that you were very sincere, because it's a very academically intense university. Every student there is fighting for the dean's list. They're so like into their academics, so like motivated for that. So I think that really matters. So I sort of catered my 750 words on the fact that I did all of my interest, or I did everything to strengthen my interest in arbitration while maintaining a steady academic profile. So that is sort of what I inculcated in my SOP. I think maybe that worked out.
That's really nice. So I've heard from other guests that Oxford, Cambridge has like some sort of a cutoff when it comes to CGPA and all that. Do you think NUS also has a similar thing?
Yeah, they have put it on their website as well.
Okay.
Like when I applied, it was 8.5. Like they write it as B, but when I spoke to the guidance counselor there, she was like, we write an 8.5 to seem, generous, but it's largely like at a 9 is where we draw the line for, international applicants. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
sort of, yeah, it is academically, it's a little strict. Yeah.
Makes sense. Right. So now that we have covered the SOP, let's move on to the letters of recommendations. How do you decide whom to approach, considering that you didn't have any work experience post undergrad? So did you refer to the teachers, or what process did you use for letters of recommendations?
Okay, so this is where my research sort of lagged a little bit, and it's so funny that I had researched so much. But when I read academic referees, I just thought it had to be professors. But it wasn't until I went for my LLM, I got to know a lot of people had gotten recommendations of people they had interned or like clerked with for a while. So you can always do that. I went to because this was an arbitration LLM, I went to my arbitration course coordinator, who was also the head of our committee for ADR, and I sort of got his recommendation. And then there was this one teacher who I loved dearly. So she was, and in her subjects, I had gotten gold medals. So I went to her for my recommendation. So I think it really matters if you have a personal connect with one of your professors for academic references, of course. It would be great to score a recommendation with them. You can always, like, I would recommend like sitting them down, telling them what you want out of what this recommendation letter to essentially say. Sometimes some professors are old and they don't want to put in the effort of writing it. So I would not suggest you write your own. Then you tell some other friend of yours to write it for you, and then you vet it through them and do it. A lot of people do that. But as organic or as original can it be, that would be the best recommendation or reference letter that you can get to know you for your application. And if in case you were someone who's a little shy and has not made that person of a connect with a professor or has not interacted that much with a professor, then I recommend like building a conversation with them just pursuant to this. So I have gone to teachers who I needed recommendations from. Like Oxford needs 5 references. I needed 5 for it because I had also applied for a scholarship and the program separately. So there was one professor who had not like had much of a connect with, but he was the registrar then. So I went to him and I was like, okay, sir, this is what I expect out of this letter. And sort of having that conversation, because they're always ready to put their students out, right? So you need to understand what opportunity you're talking about and where to get it from. So if your LLM is an environmental law, I suggest getting one from your professor in that subject. If you want to do criminal law, international criminal law, then someone who was a public international law teacher would be a great person to recommend. So sort of make it, and if it's a general LLM, get your head of the department to write it for you. So make it impactful in the sense that they first, what they see is going to be the letterhead, and then they're going to read it. So you have to understand where their thinking is coming from. It can't just be say you're applying for an arbitration and you've just gotten a constitution law teacher to recommend you. As personal as it is, it should be a supplement to your main recommendation letter.
Makes sense. Yes.
That strategy also needs to be put in place. Yeah.
Right, right. So, like you mentioned, you've done extensive research when it comes to this LLM application. But besides that, did you seek any assistance of any other consultants? You've done an internship with a study abroad consultancy. Did you seek their
Yes.
help, or did you go for any other consultants for your application process? Or what are your thoughts in general about seeking professional assistance?
I don't know. Like I interned, like I did a small stint with Wizards because they had a very cool like internship post that they had put up. So they wrote like he sent us a CV with an interesting fact about yourself, and that sort of like intrigued me, and that's why I sent them a mail and with an interesting fact about myself, and they got back. Like I wanted to know what these consultancies do in general, is why I interned with them, and do I need this for my application? This was a part of my research that I wanted to know what do they offer me that I cannot do on my own, and do I really need to spend that much money on something? So I sort of wanted to understand the role legal consultancies play in your application and how much they assist you. They do a lot for you, but personally, what they did, what I saw in my internship process is that I sort of didn't need that amount of help. I wasn't really planning on going for US LLMs that much. There was just one university I wanted to see if again, in my it was more out of curiosity. Will I? It was more of that. So again, for someone who needs that assistance, sure, if you don't have the time or like, because I had COVID, so I was home most of the time, so I could research. Yeah, so as I said, my goal for interning with them was largely that I wanted to understand the process of how these consultancies work, get into their brain, and see what they offered me that I could not do on my own, largely. And because I had so much time, I think the major reason that I could do this research was because it was the 2 years of the COVID that I got on my hand. So if someone feels that they need and they don't have the time, because I see my juniors right now, it's very intense. I see, you are in second year, you know what it is like, and I don't think COVID is happening anytime soon. Hopefully
Yeah.
not. So if that's something that you need that additional guidance, sure. But I was lucky enough to be home to, be with my family, with my father guiding me through a lot of it and just getting through the process. It sort of was very seamless. And like especially universities like NUS make it really easy for you.
Right.
Most of the application process is directed through the university sending documents to them, so it's not my like undergrad university sending documents to them and all of that. So it wasn't really that big of a task where I needed, help from a legal consultancy. At this point, do I think should I have used it? I don't think so.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it worked out well for me because I had done that research early on. If you are someone who has lately figured out that, you can do this, well, you might as well, right? I, as someone who's intern there, they do their research. They take their job very seriously as well. So I would recommend that those for the people who don't have the time in hand. That's it, right?
That totally makes sense. So let's talk about the NUS LM program specifically. It's known for its rigorous curriculum, and you've mentioned that as well. Could you elaborate on how the program was, its structure, how it helped you deepen your expertise in dispute resolution?
Okay, so it was a 10-month course, spanned through like August to April of the next year. And it sort of it was not just like the courses that we did. There were also like seminars being held. There were career guidance sessions included in our course, and we could reach out to seniors. There were clubs that you could be part of. There was Center for International Law, stuff like that. So there was everything you could do as an undergrad student was open to LLM students. Now you study with the LLB cohort as well. So the courses are open to each of these courses are open to all of the students of the university, and they can take it up. So you could be studying with a second year LLB student reading international law or international investment law, stuff like that. So I think that really sort of made me it's very interactive. It becomes very interactive. The kind of questions they have versus the kind of perspective you have coming from an Indian law school sort of really adds on to the experience. For each semester there were 6 courses we were supposed to take. And there for my LLM. So if you have a specialized LLM, there will be certain mandatory courses in the first week, in the first semester. So we had 3 like mandatory courses, which included international commercial arbitration, international dispute settlement, and then there was international like law, like just arbitration law. And when we were doing that, apart from that, I decided to take like a course which made me curious, which was business and finance for lawyers. So
Wow.
I have a commerce background, yeah. So in my first sem, I sort of did that, did not take other arbitration courses. Enough of it. I'll just do something else. And then we had these, like, for the break, there was like a semester break, or you want to call it like a examination break, where there were these short-term courses. For that, I had taken SIAC and institutional arbitration course. So that was like taught to us by people who are working at SIAC and how they process everything, like from award vetting to, acceptance of arbitration disputes, how do firms approach them, all of that was entailed. And in my second semester, and you could take any subject. So I took up like jurisprudence, I read international investment law, I took up, domestic and international sale of goods. I just take anything, like any random course in the second semester because I thought arbitration wise I was sorted. Now I will just read courses from like these well-known professors of NUS.
Okay.
So I sort of did that. Jurisprudence was really interesting to read it from a like international student like perspective. It was very fun to read, how they teach it there versus what we read here, right? So it was really fun. So I mean, in terms of courses, there's a plethora to choose from. There was like fashion law, there was, like so many things, international goods. There was this course on, the Bible.
Wow.
So I mean, yes, I like the legal analysis of what the Bible and the birth of Jesus and stuff like that. So it's a pretty great university if you want to do, if you feel like, you want to create this whole mini basket of courses. I think the like NUS has a lot to offer.
Wow, that sounds like a very, extensive course with a lot of interesting subjects. I think
It was,
that's
yeah.
really cool. So, Singapore, as I understand, offers only a 1 year post-study work permit for international students. How did you navigate this challenge, and what strategies did you employ to maximize your chances of integrating into the Singaporean legal system, if you even wanted to work over there?
Okay, so that way, the whole university permit is pretty much sorted on their end. Like the university helps you out. The 1 year work permit sort of depend on the sponsorship you get from your firms. So in case you end up working with, say, a firm and they want to retain you for a bit, then there are two kind of permits. There's one which is the work permit you were talking about. There's other an employee pass sort of thing. So that depends on the salary that the firm decides to pay you, because the idea is that since you're not Singapore qualified, getting an associate position sort of becomes difficult. Like you could either be there as an intern, a long-term intern, or an extern, or a paralegal. And they also have this post called like a legal executive. You could just end up being that. So if you get an employment opportunity like that, then the firm essentially sponsors it for you. The 1 year work permit also depends on the kind of offer that you've gotten. So that is what you apply on your own, and your firm also has to endorse that. They might not sponsor it, but they have to endorse for it. And if they do that, then again, it sort of depends on the embassy and the ICA to decide if, that is a valid cause for you to stay back. They've recently changed their policies in terms of migration and hiring international students in the legal fraternity. So it's sort of become a little difficult for students to navigate. So I would recommend that you do your research as to how much you really want to work in Singapore. From what I have spoken to people is that if you are double qualified, like if you dual qualified, if you get like say a qualification from the UK, it does become very easy to crack into the Singapore market. So maybe, people can look into that because, you could crack the SQE and then try to enter the Singapore market. Or something that you can do is try to crack a vacation scheme. That would be very ideal. Like if you get a Singapore-based vacation scheme, then the endorsement can still work out. Like I know a few people who are still in like they've been there as for a year as an intern, that like they will still, the firm will still pay you. It's just that because the firms have restrictions in terms of how many international people can they have, because Singapore is sort of focused in getting their own gentry employed more. So you have to factor that in, do your research, have the policies change. They change frequently basis on the economy's need, right? So sort of like post-COVID, there was this certain resistance toward international students coming in and staying in Singapore. So that is why this sort of happened.
Mhm.
So I mean, if that is a challenge you need to navigate, you need to be updated on the policies that is there. Speak to people who are already working there. and understand what is the requirement of a firm and what do you offer as an Indian qualified lawyer, right? If your firm has an India desk, should apply and push for it. But if a firm doesn't, then try talking to them as someone who can work from India for them. I have people who have done that. There are small law firms who want an India base but can't afford to sponsor you, so they will, so you can still earn in Singapore dollars, be affiliated with a Singapore company while you're working in India. So you can sort of work those things out, right? So
Right.
see what is going on in terms of in that country, and then plan out the kind of work profile you want to indulge in. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay, so I was going through your profile, and publications were something that were quite important in your legal journey as well. And they span like a wide range of topics, from arbitration to even space tourism to feminism. How are you able to write about socially relevant issues and core legal topics at the same time?
So I think feminism came very naturally because I was in the ICC, and I, sort of really like sociology, jurisprudence. I'm really into those discussions, and at the core, it's what is there. We're all aligned to some cause all the other, right? So if that be as as relevant as feminism, why not? And then space tourism was something that just sort of happened after university was thinking of organizing a conference. I got a whiff of it, and I was like, okay, this is an interesting topic. I should read up about it. Like, what is effectively space tourism, and what are we talking here in terms of space pollution and everything like that, right? So I think what really matters when you're writing about something is, do you really want to write about it? I think that should be your starting point, and how interested I am in this subject to write about it, to spend my time researching on it, and to write something that is actually, some words worthy someone's time, right? So I think just start there, write the most basic stuff, write something you would want to read, and I think it'll become publication worthy. And as you go along in the process, you will write something that 20 people want to read, then 50, then 100, then thousands. I think that is how it gets amplified.
Right. Do you think they played an important role when it comes to the application process for your LLM?
Oh, it definitely did for me, not just like for NUS. For Oxford, my research tells me that, Oxford really, respects publications, international publications. If you have reached out to an audience, if you're someone who sort of writes small posts or analysis on LinkedIn as well, that also really matters.
Wow. So, besides the DC Very Young Arbitration Practitioners, you're a young member of various other groups like the MCIA, YIAG, ICCA. What are the benefits of being a member of such groups? And firstly, how can one become a part of these groups? And secondly, how can one capitalize on these memberships?
Okay, so being a member is pretty easy. Like, just like you can just apply through their universities, write a small letter or like small statement of interest, and send in your CV. And they will see, are you someone who's really into arbitration, is trying to build something. I think application sort of, it's not that difficult. It sort of really helped me getting on the mentorship program, because one-on mentorship is something that is very key, very important into deciding. As I told you in the very beginning, like, to develop a niche, you need to meet people who have already done something in the field, and they can let you know the ugly truth of it, right? So in that sense, I really wanted to reach out the most people I could while sitting at home. And this, being a young member really offered me that opportunity with YIG, YIAG, CI, student CIAP committees, all of these. And these also, what they do is, if they have events which are sort of like paid events, they have concessions for young members who are already part of the community, or they have like these for free, and they send out emails which would concise the event for you if you were unable to attend it. So I think it sort of keeps you updated with what's going on an international level, on a community level, and then what is important for you as a student member. With MA, I was able to do like diversity and inclusion programs. With Young ICC, I was able to attend these programs about women in arbitration. With Arbitral Women, sort of, we got a bursary from Arbitral Women, so for our Wismode participation, and they sponsored our participation there. So it's sort of like, yeah, it sort of strengthens your build in the community, might keeps you updated, and again, it strengthens the fact that you want to do this in the future. So if it's like, there are, and it's not just for like arbitration, there is this, these are there for people in environmental law, people in corporate law, women in competition law. So it's really, it's sort of a community building exercise. It helps you network, and it helps you keep yourself updated. I think all of these three things are very important in law school.
Right, right, right. So you're currently working as an associate at Savarnati Law Offices. Could you tell us about your role and responsibilities there and how your experiences have influenced in the way you approach work?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, currently I do a mix of everything. It's a boutique law firm, so I get to do everything that's thrown at me. I'm an associate. I've been with them for like, I completed my 1 year first week of November. Here, it's been pretty great. So my bosses were a part of a law firm before they started this law firm again, and then they have done like a lot of bilateral investment treaty arbitrations in their course with the previous firm, right? So I wanted to work with sir and ma'am because they had the sort of they knew what they were doing. Like they had done BITs, and I'm really into investment arbitration. I'm really into arbitration, and sir was the litigation head of his previous. So I mean, my exposition to arbitration and my want to be continuously associated to it sort of drove me to work here. Well, as much as I like doing everything else, I'm sort of also in touch. Like I have an arbitration going on, and it also keeps me on my toes on the side. So I do get to do a lot of commercial litigation, which was something that I did not know was so intrinsic to, commercial law. So I get to do like IBC stuff. I do like competition law as well. So I think other than that, like my experiences at NUS of like building network, of reaching out to people for opportunities, like learning that from there and using whatever I've learned to present myself a certain way. I think that really helped me. Like my education sort of refined what I had already known. And then I could put it out to my bosses here and make an impression in my interviews, or make an impression. And if they know that if there comes a certain kind of a case, they know who to call out of the other associates, right? So I think it really matters as to what you're trying to learn from here and what you're trying to, demonstrate at the first instance. So I think that sort of that cultural change, or that aspect that has been added on to me, that little flair that NUS brings, I think that really, shapes the aspect of what I do as an associate at Swerniti.
That's very nice. So, as we reach our last few questions, as the first alumni of TSNLU to attend NUS, you are literally a trailblazer in your own right. How do you personally define success in your career, and what are your long-term goals that drive you forward?
Okay, I saw this question. Like I genuinely don't know how to define success at this point. I think, I always thought that being content is something that really matters. But as a lawyer, you'll never be content. Like, you never have enough cases. You will never have enough an impact. But I do think success is something that if, 20 years later, I can turn back to people I had worked with at my first firm, turn back to my bosses at the first firm, and, reach out for a favor, or, learn something from them once again, get a chance to interact with them. I think that is success for me, to build a network so wholesome and so, fulfilling. I think that would really matter, because law at the end of the day is all about connections, is about, it's about making a name for yourself and for those who have helped you come up to this point, right? So it's so community based, it's so fraternity based, that I think to make a name in the fraternity, that is all that matters. That if I turn back to someone, they're ready to do something for me, right? So I think that is how I will define success. And like to reach a point where I can take each day on its own. Like I don't have to fret about what's coming in next. I think that would be a sigh of relief for me in terms of how I define success. Where do I see myself in the future? I think that sort of keeps changing, but I do want to see myself like in a law firm, like well established in a law firm. I think I really enjoy the corporate structure. I do enjoy working there. So that is something I really look forward to doing. Yeah.
Right, right. So throughout your journey on networking, connecting, it has been a very important part. Do you have any tips for, listeners for how do you get better at networking? How do you get better at like connecting with people so you can establish long-term connections with them?
Yeah. I think be yourself. That I mean, to be fair, I'm not someone like I had a lot of issues talking to people, reaching out to people. It's just that cold emailing and LinkedIn messages are so impersonal at the first instance. I was like, okay, even if they don't see it, it's fine. I would be really nervous to reach out to help or write that one email or just write that one message. But that's when I realized they get 100 of these, and if it works out for you, why not, right? So take that leap of faith, send out that email, send out that message, build that connection. Like when I was at NUS, I would just ask partners if they could spare some time, or quick chat or over Zoom, or like meet me for a coffee. And so many partners of so many law firms were open to doing that. They were open to like having that cup of coffee or getting on a Zoom. Like it was really surprising for me as well. Like, but how happy, or how glad they were to stake out that time for you, because it matters to them as well. Like it also sort of builds their image in the community and what they did for the people in like starting out in their journey. So, just get rid of your apprehensions, get rid of your inhibitions, start writing those emails. And, just because you don't get responses to 5 of these, even if one works out for you, that's all you need, right? So keep talking to people, keep talking to seniors, keep in touch with your juniors. I think that make it as friendly as it can be, right? Make it as candid. Don't just go to people and be like, oh, I need a job, or I need a recommendation, I need this. Talk to them. What have they done? What is their part of something that was in their journey that really inspired you to talk to them today?
Right.
So something like that would really help. Like I just found this one partner of a Singapore firm. I reached out to her and she really liked The Office. And I'm a big Office fan. And we just kept talking about The Office. And then I just wrote to her the next day, like, okay, is there something for me? And she did respond, and like it sort of she did offer me an internship, but I couldn't stay back. That was different. But then again, like this is just like because of The Office. So I'm just telling you that just about that personal connect. They will remember you as long as you make sure that they remember. I think that's it. Yeah.
That's really nice. So, finally, what advice would you give to students who are considering pursuing them abroad? Any advice you wish you had received before you were starting?
Okay, so I'll start with the second question. Something I do think I would have really appreciated as an advice, that I should maybe get a few years of experience in, because what sort of that does is it gives you a practical exposition, and you know how the law works in your country. Because I saw people in my cohort given inputs in class which were based on their personal experiences, like how they in an arbitration face this issue, and what is the international law writing community, or what is Singapore law sort of say on it. Like that was sort of missing from my caliber. I may have like I was definitely I had what I had to offer was more theoretical in terms of like, so I had a much easy time writing exams, because I had just like 4 months back I was writing exams, right? Which the people who were already working were struggling with, like how do you write now, right? How do you write an exam? How do you impress a professor? Something
Yeah.
like that. But they definitely had more practical solutions to offer. Like this is how it works in our country. What is it in yours? So yeah, maybe getting in a few years of experience would not do you any harm. If you do end up like getting 2 years of experience, that sort of opens opportunity for you to apply to universities like Columbia and Yale. I did not have that because they have a 2 year experience, application requirement. So it sort of opens up universities for you to apply to. So maybe get work experience. That is something I will recommend, or something I would have wished that I would have gotten. Another tip would be like don't apply, just blindly apply. If you have the resources, direct those resources into catered applications. Put in your time. Don't just apply to 15 and just get into any random university with a general LLM program because it's study abroad. I would suggest that you do more catered research. You tailor your applications accordingly. Sit with your applications, read it. Would you want to give yourself admission? Understand the process and try to get into the psyche of the university. What is the image that they're trying to build, and then work on it. That would be my like blanket advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's some really great advice. And that brings us to the end of this episode. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to you for sharing such valuable insights and candid experiences with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you found today's discussion as enlightening as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and leave us a comment. Until next time, this is Ria. Thank you.